Rancher lived alone for years, until 10 Lakota women asked for shelter on his ranch. The sun was just beginning to rise over the red plains of the distant planet, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. The rancher had lived here for years alone, in a world that seemed both wild and empty. He was a tall man, with broad shoulders, sun-weathered skin, and eyes that had seen more storms than most people could imagine. His hands were rough, calloused from years of tending to his herd of genetically engineered cattle that roamed the dusty hills and alien grasslands. Life had taught him to depend on himself and the land, to read the winds and skies, and to respect the strange, often dangerous creatures that wandered this lonely world. His ranch was a simple place, made of metal and wood that had been scavenged and repaired over the years. The cattle were his only companions, each one bred to survive the harsh environment. They were strong, sturdy animals, with thick hides and sharp instincts, capable of withstanding the planet's fierce storms and rocky terrain. The rancher moved among them quietly each morning, checking for injuries, feeding the calves, and making sure the water channels were clear. His life was routine, repetitive, but he had grown to appreciate the peace that came with solitude. The nights were the hardest. The wind would howl through the canyons, carrying strange sounds from the distant mountains. Sometimes, the ground would shake with the passing of enormous alien beasts, and the sky would glow with the movement of unfamiliar constellations. The rancher had learned to sleep lightly, always aware of the world beyond his fences. He had no family here, no friends, and no one to share his victories or failures. He had grown accustomed to being alone, believing that it was safer that way. But on this particular morning, something unusual broke the rhythm of his solitary life. As he rode his horse along the northern ridge, scanning the horizon for signs of his cattle, he noticed a movement in the distance. At first, he thought it was a mirage, a trick of the rising sun, but as he squinted, he realized that there were figures, 10 human shapes, slowly making their way across the plains. They moved carefully, carrying small bundles, and their steps were tired and deliberate. Curiosity stirred in the rancher, but caution quickly followed. He had seen travelers before, wandering the desert alone or in small groups. Some were merchants, some were explorers, and some were dangerous bandits looking to steal what he had worked so hard to build. He decided to observe from a distance, leading his horse along a hidden path that would give him a better view without being seen. As he watched, he noticed something remarkable. The figures were women, dressed in clothing that suggested they were from a different place, a different culture. Their garments were simple but sturdy, suited for long travel across harsh terrain. There was a sense of dignity in their movement, a quiet strength that made him pause. He had lived alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to see people who were not connected to his daily routine or his work. The rancher returned to his house and prepared for their arrival. He filled the water troughs, checked the stables, and made sure that his rifles were ready, not because he wanted to use them, but because he could not take chances. He was a man of principles and caution, and while he rarely interfered with the lives of others, he knew that survival often required careful planning. By midday, the 10 women had reached the edge of his property. They stopped at the fence, exhausted, and looked around, clearly searching for shelter. The rancher rode slowly toward them, keeping his distance but making his presence known. The women turned to him, their faces a mixture of relief and caution. One of them, the apparent leader, stepped forward and spoke in a calm, measured voice. "Please," she said, "we mean no harm. We are in need of shelter and safety. We have traveled far and are being pursued. We ask for your help." The rancher studied them closely. Their eyes were clear and honest, their posture respectful. He sensed no deception, only the exhaustion and fear of people who had endured much. Still, he hesitated. His life had been built on solitude, and the thought of allowing strangers, especially 10 women, into his ranch was unsettling. But something in their plea stirred a part of him that he had long kept buried, the instinct to help those in genuine need. After a moment of silence, he nodded. "You may stay for the night," he said, "but you must understand this land is dangerous. The desert is unforgiving, and there are creatures that will not hesitate to attack. Follow my rules, and you will be safe." Relief washed over the women's faces. They thanked him quietly, moving toward the ranch house with a mixture of weariness and hope. The rancher led them inside, showing them the space he had prepared for travelers, simple but sufficient to provide warmth and rest. He did not pry into their past, but he could tell that their journey had been long and difficult. That night, as the storm clouds gathered on the horizon and the wind began to howl, the rancher sat outside, watching the women settle around the fire. He observed them as they shared what little food they had and spoke in low, soothing tones to keep each other calm. There was a quiet resilience in their movements, a determination to survive that reminded him of himself in earlier days. He felt a strange sense of connection, a bond that did not require words. He remembered his own loneliness, the years spent talking only to the wind and the cattle. He realized that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to share space with others, to offer protection and guidance. He felt a flicker of something he had not felt in a long time, the stirrings of companionship, the recognition that life could be more than survival. The storm arrived with a roar, lightning flashing across the plains and rain pelting the metal roofs. Inside, the women huddled together, sharing warmth and comfort. The rancher checked the cattle and the fences, ensuring that nothing would be lost to the elements. As he moved through the ranch, he felt a sense of purpose that had been missing from his solitary days. Protecting his land now meant protecting lives, and that responsibility brought a strange satisfaction. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the plains washed and glistening. The women emerged, their faces bright with hope despite their fatigue. They worked alongside the rancher, helping with the cattle and clearing debris left by the storm. The rancher noticed how quickly they adapted to the land, their skills complementing his own. It became clear that these women were more than travelers. They were survivors, capable and resilient, with knowledge and instincts that matched the harshness of the frontier. Over the following days, the rancher began to learn more about them. They spoke of distant lands, of a people who had been forced to flee by a powerful and dangerous enemy. They explained that their journey had been long and perilous, with threats at every turn. The rancher listened, offering advice when he could, teaching them the ways of the land, the habits of the cattle, and the tricks for surviving in a world that did not forgive mistakes. For the first time in years, the rancher felt a sense of community, fragile but real. He realized that while his solitude had kept him safe, it had also limited his understanding of what life could offer. The presence of these women, their courage and determination, began to reshape his perception of the world. He found himself laughing quietly at their jokes, sharing meals, and observing their ingenuity with quiet admiration. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of crimson, the rancher stood on the ridge, watching the women gather around the fire. He thought about the long road ahead, the dangers that would surely come, and the responsibility he had taken on by offering them shelter. Yet, for the first time in years, he did not feel fear. He felt readiness, a quiet strength born of solitude but tempered by the presence of others who shared his determination to survive. The night air was calm, and the stars of this alien world shone brightly above. The rancher returned to the fire, sitting among the women, listening to their stories and sharing small pieces of his own life. He realized that life on the frontier, no matter how wild or dangerous, was richer when shared. He understood that this encounter was no accident. Perhaps the universe had a way of reminding even the loneliest souls that connection and trust were not weaknesses, but strengths. As he looked around at the women, he knew that their journey was far from over, and his solitude was now a thing of the past. He did not yet know what the future would hold, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The rancher had lived alone for many years, and yet, as he sat by the fire surrounded by 10 strong and determined women, he sensed that his life was about to change in ways he could never have imagined. And in that quiet moment under the endless sky of the alien plains, the rancher understood one simple truth. Survival was important, but companionship, trust, and courage were what made life worth living. The days passed slowly on the ranch, each one marked by the same rhythms of work and survival, yet now there was a new energy in the air. The 10 women had settled into the routines of ranch life, moving with quiet confidence among the cattle and the land. The rancher watched them carefully, still wary but beginning to appreciate their presence. He noticed how quickly they adapted, their movements precise and their minds sharp. It was as though they had been trained not only to survive, but to thrive in places most people would avoid. Early each morning, the rancher would ride across the plains, checking the fences and guiding the cattle. The women followed, learning how to read the landscape, how to sense danger in the wind, and how to track the movement of animals across the dusty ground. The rancher was impressed by their ability to notice details he might have overlooked. One of them, a young woman with dark hair and keen eyes, pointed out a patch of thorny weeds that could injure the calves if left unchecked. Another suggested a new route for watering the livestock, one that avoided a dry canyon where the heat trapped the animals during the afternoons. Despite the growing trust, there was still caution. The rancher had spent years relying only on himself, and opening his life to others was not easy. Yet, he found himself speaking more, offering advice and telling stories of the land, the weather, and the strange creatures that roamed the plains. The women listened, nodding and asking questions, not only about survival but about his experiences, his long years alone, and the choices that had brought him to this place. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the jagged cliffs, casting long shadows over the plains, the young woman with dark hair approached him. "We found something today," she said quietly. "A cave hidden near the northern ridge. It seems old, maybe very old. There are strange markings, and some objects inside that do not look like anything we have seen before." The rancher frowned. He had explored much of the land around the ranch, yet he had never noticed the cave. Its entrance was cleverly concealed behind a thick cluster of rocks, almost invisible unless one knew where to look. "You went in?" he asked cautiously. "Not far," she replied. "We only peeked inside, but there is technology, tools, or machines of some kind. They seem to be left behind by another civilization. We do not know if they are safe." The rancher's heart quickened. He had seen remnants of alien civilizations before, scattered artifacts across the desert, but he had never discovered a place so intact. He knew the dangers of meddling with unknown technology. Still, he was curious, and he understood that these women had a sharp eye for discovery. "We should look at it together," he said. "But carefully, one wrong move and it could be dangerous." The next morning they approached the cave. The women moved silently, scanning the surroundings while the rancher led the way, keeping his hand near the rifle slung across his back. The cave entrance was dark, cool, and inviting, a sharp contrast to the blazing sun outside. The air smelled faintly of earth and something metallic, something unfamiliar. Inside, the walls were etched with strange patterns, and scattered on the floor were tools and devices that shimmered faintly under the light of their torches. The rancher examined the objects carefully, noting that some were clearly designed for survival and defense. There were devices that could project light over long distances, tools to detect movement, and containers that held unknown substances, perhaps fuel or energy sources. The women looked around with fascination, their eyes wide but respectful. They had traveled long distances, faced dangers, and learned the value of caution. "This could help us," the rancher said slowly. "If used properly, it could make the ranch safer, but we must be careful. This technology is not ours, and we do not fully understand it." Over the next few days, they experimented with the devices, testing them carefully in controlled ways. They used one tool to detect the movement of the cattle at night, ensuring none wandered off. Another device helped them set up a barrier to keep out smaller predators, while the larger ones required skill and courage to confront. The rancher watched as the women learned quickly, their intelligence and instinct allowing them to understand the tools far faster than he could have expected. Life on the ranch began to feel different. The women were no longer just guests. They were partners, sharing the responsibilities of survival, contributing ideas, and solving problems. The rancher, who had always believed solitude was safety, began to understand the value of collaboration. Together, they were stronger, more capable of facing whatever dangers the planet might bring. Yet, despite the growing harmony, tension lingered. The rancher could not ignore the distant threat that had driven these women to his ranch in the first place. He had heard rumors of raiders, groups that captured travelers for their own gain. He had seen traces of these raiders on the desert paths, signs of struggle and warning markers left for others to find. He knew that the women's pursuers were still out there, and that their presence at the ranch might attract unwanted attention. One afternoon, while inspecting the perimeter, the rancher spotted unusual tracks near the edge of the property. They were large, humanoid, but the boots, or whatever they were, left prints that did not match any he had seen before. He signaled to the women and they came to examine the tracks with him. "They are following us," the young woman said, her voice low but steady. They will find us if we are not careful. We must prepare. The rancher nodded, a sense of determination settling over him. For the first time in many years, he felt the weight of responsibility not just for himself but for others. He organized the women, assigning tasks to reinforce fences, gather supplies, and set up observation points. Together, they worked like a single unit, each person contributing their unique skills to the safety of the ranch. As night fell, the sky glowed with the light of distant stars, unfamiliar constellations that reminded the rancher of how small and fragile life could be in this vast world. They gathered around the fire, planning and strategizing. The women shared stories of their journey, of the hardships they had faced, and of the people they had left behind. The rancher listened, understanding that their strength came not only from skill but from a deep sense of purpose and unity. Days turned into weeks, and the rancher began to notice changes within himself. The quiet, solitary man who had lived for years without human companionship was becoming part of something larger. He found satisfaction in teaching, in sharing knowledge, and in witnessing the women's clever solutions to problems that once would have seemed impossible. He laughed more, spoke more, and felt a connection to life that he had long thought lost. Then one morning, a scout returned from the northern ridge with alarming news. A group of raiders had been spotted in the distance, moving swiftly across the plains. They were heavily armed, and their numbers suggested that they would not hesitate to take what they wanted by force. The rancher studied the horizon, calculating the distance and speed of the approaching threat. He realized that their sanctuary, however carefully hidden, would soon be under test. He called the women together, and for the first time there was no hesitation in his voice. "They are coming," he said. "We have time, but not much. We must prepare every trap, every fence, every device. We are not alone anymore, and together we will protect this land." The women nodded, their expressions resolute. They moved quickly, coordinating with the rancher, blending their skills with his knowledge of the land. Each trap, each defensive position was placed with care, designed to exploit the terrain, to slow the raiders, and to give them an advantage. They worked late into the night, their movements precise, their determination unyielding. Finally, as the first light of dawn touched the plains, the rancher and the women stood together at the ridge, watching the horizon. Dust clouds rose in the distance, signaling the approach of the raiders. The rancher felt a surge of something he had not felt in years, anticipation, but not fear. He knew that they were ready, not just to survive, but to stand and fight if necessary. For the first time in his long life on the frontier, the rancher understood that solitude had its limits, and that true strength came from trust, collaboration, and courage shared among those who stood together. The land was wild, the dangers real, and the challenges unending. But with the women by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came next. And so, on that distant planet with the alien sky above and the plains stretching endlessly below, a new chapter began. The ranch was no longer just a place of survival. It was a home, a fortress, and a symbol of unity. The rancher and the 10 Lakota women, strangers at first, were becoming something more than companions. They were a team, bound by shared purpose, resilience, and the unspoken understanding that together, they could endure anything. The morning sun rose slowly over the alien plains, casting a golden light on the ranch. The air was dry, the wind whispering through the rocky ridges, carrying a faint scent of dust and metal. The rancher stood on the ridge with the 10 Lakota women, scanning the horizon. Far in the distance, he could see the approaching dust clouds. The raiders were coming. Their ships, strange and jagged, skimmed the desert floor, moving faster than anything the rancher had seen. His heart beat steadily, not from fear but from focus. He had prepared for this moment, yet he knew that survival would depend on teamwork, timing, and clever use of the land. The women moved with quiet confidence, each taking her position near the perimeter. They were not just survivors, they were strategists ready to protect the ranch that had given them shelter. The rancher called out instructions, careful not to waste words. "Use the canyon traps here, place the decoys on the ridge. Remember, stay hidden until they are close enough. We strike together." They moved like a single unit, a silent force blending with the land. The youngest woman positioned herself near the water channel, ready to create a distraction if needed. Another climbed a rocky outcrop to observe from above, signaling movements to the others with small gestures. The rancher checked the ancient technology they had found in the cave, confirming that each device was functioning. Lights flickered across the equipment, sensors scanning the terrain for movement. He trusted the women to handle what he could not monitor alone. The raiders drew closer, and the dust clouds swirled in the heat of the desert. The rancher noticed their approach patterns, calculating the distance and timing. These were not ordinary thieves. They were trained, disciplined, and dangerous. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing against him. He had chosen to shelter the women, and now he had to protect them. Yet he did not doubt their abilities. Together, they had become more than a group of survivors. They were a team. A sharp whistle from the scouts signaled the first sign of danger. A small group of raiders had separated from the main force, attempting to flank the ranch from the east. The rancher and two women moved quickly to intercept them, using narrow paths between jagged rocks to stay out of sight. From their hidden position, they observed the raiders' movements, counting their numbers and noting the weapons they carried. These were not simple blasters or hand tools. They had advanced alien weapons designed to penetrate armor and shields. The rancher whispered instructions. "Wait until they are in the canyon, then trigger the traps. We do not fight alone." The women nodded, each understanding her role without question. The air was tense, filled with anticipation. Even the cattle seemed restless, sensing the presence of outsiders. The rancher glanced at them, relieved to see that they were calm enough to follow their routines, a small sign of stability in the chaos to come. The raiders entered the canyon, unaware of the traps hidden among the rocks. The first decoy triggered a cascade of stones, blocking part of the path and forcing the raiders to slow down. Then, a sudden flash of light from one of the devices startled them, causing confusion. The women, moving with precision, activated other sensors that detected movement and sent signals across the ridge. The raiders were caught off guard, struggling to maintain formation. The rancher and his team struck quickly. They used the terrain to their advantage, pushing the raiders into narrow paths where their numbers became less useful. The women demonstrated extraordinary skill, moving with stealth and speed, disarming traps set by the raiders and redirecting the attackers into the traps they had prepared. The rancher, with his years of experience, led small skirmishes, using strategy rather than brute force to keep the attackers off balance. One of the raiders, larger than the others and wearing heavy armor, broke away and charged toward the water channel where the youngest woman had been stationed. The rancher reacted immediately, firing a non-lethal pulse from a defensive tool they had modified. The raider stumbled but did not fall. The woman moved quickly, leading him into a trap disguised with rocks and energy nets. Within moments, he was immobilized, struggling against the devices. The skirmish continued for hours, each side testing the other. Dust rose from the ground, mixing with the faint glow of the alien technology, creating an otherworldly battlefield. The women communicated silently, anticipating each move, covering each other, and using the rancher's knowledge of the terrain to outsmart the raiders. The rancher felt a growing sense of admiration, not just for their skill, but for their courage. Each woman moved with determination, their eyes focused, their actions deliberate. They were no longer strangers, they were warriors defending their home. As the sun reached its peak, the raiders began to retreat, their numbers dwindling, their formation broken. The rancher signaled the women to hold positions, allowing the remaining attackers to flee without risking unnecessary confrontation. Slowly, the dust cleared, revealing the quiet plains once more. The rancher breathed a deep sigh of relief, looking at the women who had fought beside him. "We did it," he said quietly. "They will think twice before returning." The women smiled faintly, exhaustion visible on their faces, but also a sense of triumph. They had survived together and had proven that trust and teamwork could overcome even the most dangerous threats. The rancher looked around at the landscape, the ranch, and the cattle, feeling a strange mixture of pride and gratitude. For the first time, he understood that his life had changed forever. He was no longer alone, and his home was more than a place of survival. It was a fortress, a refuge, and a symbol of unity. In the days following the attack, the rancher and the women repaired the fences, reinforced the traps, and checked on the cattle. The raiders' presence had been a reminder that the world beyond the ranch was dangerous, but it had also strengthened the bonds among them. They shared meals, told stories, and worked together, each understanding that their survival depended not only on skill but on trust. The rancher began to notice subtle changes in himself. He laughed more easily, spoke more freely, and felt a connection to life that had been absent for years. The women brought energy, courage, and ingenuity into his life, reminding him that even in the harshest frontier, human connection could thrive. He found joy in teaching them about the land, about reading the winds, tracking the cattle, and predicting the weather. In return, they shared their own knowledge about the alien plants, the hidden water sources, and the strategies for survival on a planet that did not forgive mistakes. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant hues of orange and red, the rancher stood on the ridge with the women. The plains stretched endlessly before them, bathed in the light of a dying sun. The air was calm, the creatures of the desert quieting for the night. The rancher spoke softly, sharing stories of his years alone, of storms he had survived and lessons learned from the land. The women listened, occasionally adding their own insights, and the rancher realized that he no longer feared opening his life to others. He knew that more challenges would come, other threats, perhaps more raiders or natural dangers that lurked in the desert. But he also knew that he was no longer facing them alone. The women had become his partners, his allies, and in some ways his family. The thought gave him strength, a quiet confidence that could not be shaken by storms or enemies. As night fell, they gathered around the fire, the flames casting dancing shadows on their faces. The rancher felt a deep sense of peace. He had lived alone for years, thinking that solitude was the safest path. But now, with the women beside him, he understood that life was richer, fuller, and more meaningful when shared. They spoke in low voices, planning for the days ahead, sharing dreams and quietly celebrating their victory. The rancher realized that the frontier, no matter how wild or dangerous, was not a place to survive alone. It was a place to thrive, to connect, and to grow stronger with the help of others. The women had not only brought their skills and courage, they had brought hope, companionship, and a sense of purpose that the rancher had long thought lost. And so, under the alien stars, with the plains stretching endlessly, the rancher and the 10 Lakota women stood together. They had faced danger, survived, and learned that unity was their greatest strength. The ranch was no longer just a solitary outpost. It was a home, a sanctuary, and a place where courage, trust, and human connection could flourish. For the rancher, the lesson was clear. Life on the frontier was never truly safe, but it could be meaningful, filled with purpose, and strengthened by the bonds between those who chose to stand together. And as the fire crackled, casting its warm light across the plains, he knew that no matter what challenges awaited, they would face them as one. The morning sky was pale pink as the rancher stood on the ridge, scanning the horizon. The alien plains stretched endlessly, quiet except for the whisper of the wind. Today would be different. The raiders, having recovered from their earlier defeat, were returning in larger numbers. Their ships glinted in the sunlight, engines humming with power. The rancher could feel the tension in the air, a mix of anticipation and determination. He had faced them before, but this time the stakes were higher, not just his survival, but the safety of the 10 women who had become part of his life. The women moved quickly, each taking their positions. They were calm, focused, their previous victory giving them confidence but not arrogance. The rancher went over the plan once more. "We use the canyon and the traps, stay hidden until the right moment. Work together and we win this." His voice was steady, firm, carrying the authority of someone who had survived alone for years. The women nodded, understanding that their strength lay in unity. The first wave of raiders descended onto the plains, moving cautiously but aggressively. The rancher watched them, calculating their path, predicting their movements. As they entered the canyon, the first trap triggered. A series of stones fell, blocking part of the path. Confusion rippled through the raiders. The women, hidden among the rocks, activated light flashes from the cave technology, startling the attackers further. The battle began. The raiders tried to push forward, but the rancher and the women were ready. Each action was coordinated. One woman led a group to cut off the raiders' escape route, while another used a device to project a blinding light that forced the raiders to halt. The rancher moved with precision, using the land to his advantage, pushing attackers into narrow paths where their numbers mattered less. The plains became a maze of strategy, traps, and carefully timed maneuvers. The largest raider, a tall figure in heavy armor, tried to charge through the middle. The rancher anticipated the move. He signaled to the youngest woman, who triggered a net trap from the ridge. The raider stumbled, entangled, struggling against the restraints. Other raiders tried to regroup, but the women were relentless. They used their knowledge of the land, their instincts, and the rancher's strategies to outmaneuver each attack. Despite the chaos, the rancher maintained a calm focus. He moved between positions, checking on the women, giving silent signals, ensuring everyone was safe. The battle was long and exhausting, but the team worked seamlessly. Each woman protected another, each trap worked as planned, and the rancher's experience guided every move. Slowly, the raiders began to fall back, their formations broken, their morale shaken. During the fight, one of the raiders managed to reach the water channel where the rancher had stationed two of the women. He raised his weapon, aiming at them, but the rancher reacted instantly. He charged forward, tackling the raider and using a pulse device to immobilize him. The women quickly joined, securing the raider and ensuring no harm came to anyone. Hours passed, and the raiders realized that they could not win. Their numbers had been reduced, their tactics countered, and their confidence shattered. One by one, they retreated, leaving the plains silent once more. The rancher lowered his rifle, breathing heavily, but a sense of satisfaction settled over him. They had survived together, and more than that, they had protected their home, their community, and each other. The women gathered around him, faces tired but triumphant. "We did it," the rancher said quietly. "They will not return for a long time. We are safe for now." The women smiled, a mix of relief and pride in their expressions. For weeks, they had worked together, faced danger, and proven their strength. They were no longer just travelers, they were defenders of the ranch, partners, and friends. After the battle, the rancher and the women began to repair the ranch. Fences that had been damaged were reinforced, traps were reset, and the cattle were checked for injuries. The land bore the marks of conflict, but it also bore the marks of unity and resilience. Each task they completed together strengthened their bond, and the rancher realized that this place, once a symbol of solitude, was now a home in every sense. In the quiet moments that followed, the rancher reflected on the journey. He had lived alone for years, believing that isolation was the safest path. Yet the presence of the women had changed him, teaching him the value of trust, collaboration, and companionship. He had learned that life on the frontier was not just about surviving, it was about thriving, about sharing skills, knowledge, and courage with those who stood beside you. That evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, the group gathered around the fire. The plains were quiet, the air filled with the soft sounds of night creatures and the crackle of flames. The women shared stories of their homeland, of their journeys, and of the challenges they had faced. The rancher listened, adding his own tales of storms, alien creatures, and the quiet lessons of life on the frontier. Laughter mixed with the crackle of the fire, and for the first time in many years, the rancher felt completely at home. Over the following weeks, life settled into a new rhythm. The women helped with every aspect of ranch life, tending the cattle, managing resources, and even exploring the surrounding land for new water sources and hidden dangers. They taught the rancher new skills, showing him ways to use alien plants for medicine, and how to predict weather patterns by observing subtle changes in the sky and terrain. In turn, the rancher taught them the secrets of survival he had learned over years of solitude. The bond between them deepened. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments of reflection. The rancher began to understand that trust was not a weakness but a strength. He no longer feared the future, for he knew that together, they could face whatever challenges the alien plains might bring. One day, while exploring the northern ridge, the rancher and the women discovered a small spring hidden among rocks. The water was clear and fresh, a rare treasure on the dry planet. They celebrated quietly, understanding that this discovery would make their home even stronger and more secure. It was a reminder that the land, no matter how harsh, could provide for those who respected it and worked together. As weeks turned into months, the rancher and the women became inseparable. They celebrated victories, repaired damages from storms, and prepared for potential threats with calm determination. The ranch, once a lonely outpost, had transformed into a thriving community. The rancher, who had believed that life alone was the only safe path, now realized that companionship, trust, and shared purpose were the keys to survival and happiness. One evening, as the stars filled the alien sky, the rancher looked around at the women who had become his family. They had come seeking shelter, and in doing so had brought life, energy, and hope to his world. He felt gratitude, not only for their courage and skills, but for the lessons they had taught him about trust, unity, and resilience. The women gathered around the fire, sharing stories, laughter, and plans for the future. The rancher joined them, feeling the warmth of community, the strength of bonds formed through shared hardship, and the joy of life no longer lived in solitude. He understood that while the plains were wild and unpredictable, they had carved out a place where safety, friendship, and courage could thrive. In the end, the rancher knew that life on the frontier was never simple, never easy. There would always be challenges, storms, and threats. But now he was ready. He had allies, friends, and companions who would stand beside him, just as he would stand beside them. The ranch was no longer just his. It was theirs, a shared home, a sanctuary, and a testament to resilience and unity. And as the fire burned low, the rancher looked out over the plains, feeling a sense of peace and fulfillment he had never known in his years of solitude. He had lived alone for too long, and now, with the 10 Lakota women by his side, he understood that life was best lived together, with courage, trust, and hope lighting the way through even the harshest frontier. The alien stars twinkled above, a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the small yet significant lives they had built together. The rancher smiled quietly, grateful for the journey, the challenges, and the companions who had transformed his lonely ranch into a thriving home. Together, they had faced danger, survived, and found strength in unity. And in that strength, they discovered something far more valuable than solitude, a life worth living.